Discover how smarter project insights can lead to better project outcomes.
Hello, project people. A very warm welcome to our new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's great to have you back. And remember to hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast player. And I didn't mess that up, so thank you very much, Martin. And if you'd like to see us on YouTube, you can check us out because some of us have friendly faces. Dale, over to you, mate. It's been a long time. How you been?
I've been well, thank you, Val. We have started to return to the offices. So I've recently gone back into the office. I remember the hour commute one way and an hour back. So that reminded me of what I didn't enjoy, but it was nice to see people face to face after almost over a year and a half.
Wow.
So after a year and a half of Teams and, some of the people I'd never met before face to face, seeing them for the first time in the flesh was quite cool, actually. But yeah, that's my highlight since we last spoke.
Fantastic. And Martin, how are you today, mate?
Yeah, very good. Yeah, similar to Dale, been going back into the office a bit more frequently now. So seeing the tube's quite busy in the morning. But yeah, it's good to meet up with new people, given the amount of people that have switched jobs over the last year and a half. It's good just to meet people again as well.
That's right. A lot of people have, and it's amazing to think that they've not met their teams yet, or not met their managers or their constituents. It's amazing that work continues, and it's also refreshing to see a bit of normal come back. Let's be honest. But I do want to get to the point where we invite and say hello to our guest, who is Lorraine Humphrey. Hey, Lorraine, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
It's good to have you. And again, we're excited to tackle another topic. Geez, I did well there, didn't I? With regards to independent assurance, because we haven't actually tackled this one either, Dale. This is 2 in a row. We did construction law last pod. Lorraine, before we get into the detail, how does a girl from East Ham get into Transport for London as the director?
By a very circuitous route and over an extended period of time. Next week, I will have been at Transport for London or London Underground before that for 20 years. In those 20 years, I've worked, I came from government on secondment. I've worked in contract management under the PPP. And then I moved into project delivery, which I did for 12 years. And then I moved to assurance just to kind of look at something different. I'd been asked to work there for a couple of years, but the timing hadn't been right. And when I moved there, some opportunities came up that I never expected. So I was promoted to head of project assurance. And then earlier this year, my director retired. So I applied for the director of risk assurance role, and I got that on an interim basis. The route to getting to that point was long. I left university without a degree the first time. I went to work in the civil service, so I've taken a very non-traditional path. And as a girl from East Ham, from a very working class background, the idea of ever being a director in such a company of 27,000 people wasn't something that I ever thought would happen. So I've worked hard. I've tried to be fair and a good leader. And I've been lucky that over the last few years, those skills have been recognised and I've been able to secure the role I've got. And it's really interesting kind of seeing the company as a whole. But obviously, I'm now responsible for 5 functions of assurance rather than just the one I was before. So it's quite interesting seeing how the 3 lines of defence model works in more practice. So yeah, a long convoluted route along the route where I got an MBA, a degree in history, and then an MBA as well. So yeah, it's been a long path.
Lorraine, that's very inspiring, and I think there's a few parts we'll definitely touch in on your career, because I think a lot of people don't. Well, I think a lot of listeners and a lot of people we speak to want to know how you set a career path, because career progression and career succession, it can be difficult. And especially on the government side, there's quite a labyrinth to navigate. And so we'll probably tip into that a few times over this podcast. But I wanted to get into some baseline definitions, because I do this a lot. And I think it's because a lot of people have different interpretations of what we talk about on the show. What's your baseline definition of assurance, just to keep everyone ready?
For me, assurance is about being the people that say the emperor's got no clothes on. So it's our job to point out where things are not quite right, where there are issues with things that are not, that the senior managers need to know. But we are just there to assure we do not decide. Some directors have made that very clear to me over the years. So for us, it's about giving information based on evidence and making sure that people understand the decisions they're making in relation to the evidence that we've gathered to give them. So assurance is about keeping people honest and making sure that they can make informed decisions around what they need to, whether that's investment or controls or any of those other things that we do.
That's a very important role. Is that what attracted you to the role? It's sense of kind of not necessarily directing people to do what you say, but highlighting, hey, by the way, your shoelaces are undone. What was it that really got you interested about the role?
For me, there were only two sort of band 5 jobs I ever wanted: the head of stations and the head of project assurance. I wasn't going to chase a band 5 role in TfL at any cost. It wanted to be a job that I was going to do well. And I found my home in assurance. We joke about me being poacher term gamekeeper. So I can tell when someone's manipulating a risk register very easily. It'll always be the balancing line. It'll always be the number that miraculously fits into the EFC to make it fit the budget. So having that knowledge, because I've done it myself, I always admit that to the people I'm assuring. It's much easier to look at things from an informed perspective, and people trust what you say to them because they know you've experienced it. It's not to say you can't do assurance if you come from other areas, because we've had sponsors in the team, people from finance, all sorts of different backgrounds, but that helps bring an amalgam of people who can give good assurance because they're looking at it from different perspectives. So yes, what attracted me to the role was the fact that actually this is one of the few jobs where you get to see the whole of TfL, both from surface, London Underground, tech and data, commercial development, all those areas, and being able to provide that advice to senior management or that independent advice was very important. And I've really enjoyed how that's gone, and it's worked out pretty well so far.
Oh, that's fantastic, Lorraine. I've got one more before I pass on to Dale. I just wanted to know, it sounds like it's almost like a hand in glove role with project controls. How does it work? Just for those that are trying to wonder where, because not every project has an assurance group. You know, it's not always as common as you would think, which I think it sounds great. It's like a big cozy blanket and a critical friend at the same time. What is the relationship to project controls or the project management departments?
So we consider PMO, as Dale knows, to be first line assurance. My team within project assurance are second line assurance, and within TfL we run a 3 lines model. So we have the independent investment project advisory group. Dale deals with one of our members and I very often on one of his projects. So that 3 lines model makes it easier to give the messages as the critical friend and everything else that way. But first line is PMO, sponsors and project teams for us. And we expect the PMO teams to make sure from a first line perspective that, you know, the project teams have got all their paperwork in place, their reporting, that they've got all their controls in place, because I don't want to be doing first lines work and saying that your document's not signed and your PEP's not up to date and your controls around your schedule aren't where they should be and stuff like that. So that's the role that we see first line as undertaking. You've been warned, Dale. There you go.
I have been warned. I have been warned, and no, it's great because it actually sounds like a 3 line whip. And in many respects it is. But I suppose, Val, just to add to what you're saying, in large organizations where it is particularly, and I'll use this word in every sense, complex when it comes to the various projects, how they contribute to such a large organization, all the various moving parts, I think the 3 lines of assurance are required. I just want to rewind a little bit for those listeners. You mentioned 1 or 2 things, Lorraine, just for those that don't know. So you aspire to be band 5, which is 1 below director, for those that don't know. Yet you've exceeded that, which is fantastic. This is all open source on TFL, by the way. It's a sort of public facing company, so you can go and find all this on the internet anyway. And then EFC is EAC in other parts of the world. So it's just your estimated cost at completion. But go back if you want to know some of those acronyms. We like to bust those jargon busters as well on the show, because we do have some that are getting into the project management industry as well. So we do like just to pause at times like that, Lorraine, and share some insight as to what we mean when we use these acronyms, because there are plenty.
TFL has its own language.
Exactly. But yeah, you mentioned project controls and assurance, and Val, you mentioned assurance. It's not always in all organizations. I have worked in other organizations where you have perhaps internal audit, and it is a different form. It's not necessarily just project assurance, but they come and look at financials and business processes, but projects as well as a full bona fide audit. Maybe it's annually, maybe it's 18 months, whatever the case may be. So there's various forms of assurance for those listening in as well. But Lorraine, I know you also said you've got, is it 2 books that you in front of you that you refer to as sort of your golden guide?
Yeah.
I was wondering if there are some interesting bits that you want to pick out and share that you draw from, that you say kind of keeps you on track when you're doing your job.
Yeah, there are 2 reports that were they're both in the public domain. One was actually the London Assembly report on the ATC contract, which was the forerunner of 4 lines modernisation. And in that report, they were very critical about all aspects of TFL, from the board to the iPad group, who like I said, were the independent advisors, and to our own project assurance team at that time, which was actually sat within PMO. And what they basically said, that actually the PMO team, which were the assurance team, weren't considered to be independent because they reported to the chief officer who ran projects. So that meant that they felt they couldn't be independent. So one of the great things about my role as both director of risk and assurance, but as head of project assurance, was that we sat within general counsel, or we sit within general counsel. And that means that we are very independent. I don't have to worry about reporting to the director of finance or the director of major projects or any other managing director. Being independent makes that much easier. Obviously, I try to work very hard with all the other MDs and deliver those messages as that critical friend, being still firm and fair. But that's the kind of thing that I always bear. But, I say to my team, you are so lucky that we are independent. And what the things that they found in that ATC report around controls, around the project, the procurement not being looked at properly, various aspects of problems around technical solutions and things like that, that would never happen on my watch, because those are the kind of things that we need to look at in much more detail. And that's why it's in our meetings that we have, that are board meetings at PIC, the Programme Investment Group, and indeed the Audit Committee. We are very open about our concerns and do reports to highlight those issues to people, so that these kind of things can't happen again. So yeah, if you ever want to know what not to do on a project, that ATC report by the London Assembly is very critical. And like I said, I look at that and go, I don't want that to happen on my watch. So we need to make sure that we do assurance thoroughly. The other document is actually Margaret Hodges' report on the Garden Bridge. I think everyone knows the Garden Bridge was a very political project and lots of problems with it. And she highlights in there a number of issues around procurement, about things that didn't go well, about political influence. And again, that's something that I'm very cognizant of in assurance, is that we do work in a political environment, and understanding those politics and that kind of thing, and making sure we assure things in a way that don't take on a political form and things like that are very important too. So it's all about independence. It's all about making sure that whilst you understand the factors, that you still remain independent. And in this report, there were some issues around internal audit, which I'm also responsible for now as the director. And that's clear about making sure the reports are done in a way that are clear, that they're not watered down, and that, again, that we are independent and remain so. And that's very important to the team as a result of the Garden Bridge report and everything else that happened. So it's those two things that keep me on a path to go, I don't want those to happen. Not saying everything we do is perfect, but it's the best we can do with the information we have available, and making sure that people know it's a safe environment to raise issues. And I've been lucky to have two very good reports from our independent advisors on second line assurance saying that we're doing a good job, because we do challenge and we do things. Obviously, there's always things you can improve on, but actually doing that work well in a quite a difficult and challenging environment is hard in itself, but delivering those difficult messages is what we need to do.
Fantastic. And I'm sure those will go and Google those papers as well and get them out, but we can get the links to those and throw them in the show notes as well. I had some thoughts while you were talking there, actually, you know, being a public facing organization, Transport for London, you actually acting in the interest of the public when the public don't always have a voice on projects. So I think this is why it's particularly important as well to demonstrate not just Transport for London, but other, you know, sort of public facing organizations out in the world have something very similar that look after the interests of the public, because you start off any project with the public's interest at heart, generally speaking, and that's what you're there to ultimately ensure and assure happens. I also want to probably point people to YouTube. You can go and, you know, most of the meetings Lorraine's talking about are public. So you can go ahead and you can watch all of these board meetings and the reviews, and you can see Lorraine there defending what should and shouldn't be done, and airing and bring that transparency. So that's a great thing as well, if you didn't know. Now, my follow-up question, though, is slightly off piece, Lorraine, but I wanted to know, you mentioned all the various types of people you have within your team from various backgrounds. Now, those listening going, oh, actually, I'd like to be in assurance because it sounds like a place to be. You have independence, right? And Val and I and Martin, we've discussed this before, where as project controls, we often would love to have that independence, but often the reporting lines don't allow you to be completely dependent, because you ultimately report into some sort of project delivery director at some level. Although I think that might be changing, and maybe we'll chat about that in a second. But my question was, what is the perfect background to get into assurance? Is it project controls because we have quite a similar role, or does it not really matter at all?
I recently recruited for the head of project assurance to backfill my old role, and there were a whole gamut of people from different experience from all parts of the company. So it wasn't just project delivery. There were people from PMO, there were people from sponsorship and delivery. And so for me, and if anyone from finance or other areas had applied, that would have been great. The person that got it did have a similar background to me in project delivery. So it does seem to give you an edge, but the key thing that I was looking for at that level was leadership. it was very hard for me to give my team to someone else. When they asked me at interview what would be one of the difficult questions, I'd be stopping me sticky beaking. So yeah, but no, I think good knowledge and experience, understanding the life cycle, understanding the key things to challenge. You know, I've got people in my team who are very good from sponsorship. You know, there's all sorts of different elements that everyone can bring to it, but it's about people skills. It's about not being afraid to raise those difficult issues and challenge. The project assurance team sit in various project meetings. We call it continuous assurance. They're sitting there, they're listening, they're learning, and they're giving us that feedback, and that helps us understand and take a risk-based approach to assurance. So as long as you're someone who can learn, understand, and you know, challenge, then yes, assurance is a great place to be, because the skills that various people bring around the controls or anywhere area are really good things to do.
Awesome. So yeah, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't really matter. As Lorraine says, as long as you have a willingness to learn and pick things up, you are welcome. I want to then perhaps delve into if you're undertaking a review on a project.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously different forms of review. You have a terms of reference you issue. But typically, what would that involve? What would people expect you to do? Because one of the things is going in and, I guess, asking questions and looking at facts and figures. As project controls or PMO, we're living and breathing the project all the time, and we're very familiar with everything. And so we are able to call things out. And in a way, I guess, because we're closer, we understand the context far quicker and easier. How difficult is that coming in, sort of whether it's once a year, once every 6 months, and undertaking something like that? What is the process you and your team have to go through in order to get that context and understand if something is being controlled and governed in the right manner?
So like I said, you've heard me mention continuous assurance, and that's something that was started by my predecessor in project assurance, but it's something that we've strengthened. So we've tried to reduce the number of formal reviews we're doing so that we have time to do continuous assurance. And that means that the sort of manager grades in my team, there's 8 of them. They go to project meetings, they listen, they learn. We have a database whereby they feed back on issues around cost, risk, schedule, scope, and resourcing. And that is monitored monthly, and that sets our work bank around what are the projects we're going to look at, that we're actually going to do a review on. A couple of high profile projects are subject to 6 weekly reviews. One of them got down to weekly at one point, at a very crucial point, just because we needed that information to enable us to write reports and feed it into the committees. So it's not always easy to go in cold. We used to do it much more at much more rigid phases. And actually, that's what the ATC report said. The team were very focused on points at the life cycle going in rather than on a risk-based approach. So we've moved to a much more risk-based approach of assurance now. And we guide our independent panel of IPAG for their work bank on that basis of the continuous assurance work and what we think are areas of focus for them, because they tend to look at projects over £50 million, whereas we looked at anything over 5 million. So there's a great scale of projects, but we have intelligence because we attend the meetings, we do draft a terms of reference, we're doing much more targeted reviews now. So we don't always look at all 9 lines of inquiry that we have. If it's a contract award, then we focus on commercials. If they're doing option a selection, we're really keen to look at what options they've appraised in the business case. But all through that life cycle will be what's happening with value for money, benefits, and how the contracts are managed and stuff like that. So there are some key themes that we'll probably always look at, but we're not looking at consents if they're in delivery, because we know they've done them. So we do try and tailor the lines of inquiry much more now to give that focus, to make it sharper, based on the intelligence that we have.
Fantastic. And my follow-up question, and you'll probably appreciate this because you were a PM as well. Now, we've spoken about this before, and many PMs do like to paint a certain picture of the way their project is going.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you're kind of, now the continuous assurance is a great thing because you're starting to learn the project, which is great. But how do you go in and determine whether or not the wool is being pulled over your eyes? Are there certain things you look out for? Are there tips and tricks you can share with the listeners as to, oh, that doesn't seem right? I just wonder if you could open your box and go, yep, this is it.
Level of risk at concept design at 10%. Really? Really think that's going to last to the end of the job? So yeah, that happens quite regularly because, as I said earlier, it kind of balances the numbers to meet the budget and stuff like that. Where I call it watermelon reporting. So within TfL, we have level 1, 2, and 3 milestones. And if we're missing level 2 and 3 milestones, but we're still reporting it as green, I call that watermelon reporting, because when you cut it open in the middle, it's yellow and red. So actually trying to avoid watermelon reporting where we can see that helps us. And it's a gut feel. I've been saying to my successor, trust your gut. You've seen this before. If it doesn't smell right, go poke at it. Assure yourself that it is okay or not. And that's what we empower all our teams to do. Kind of have a look at it, poke it a bit, see if it feels right, find the evidence, because it all has to be evidence-based. And if you can't find the evidence, then you were right. It's not quite right in the first place. But that does involve having some difficult conversations with people who go, as you say, your project manager, my project's great. Well, what do you mean that I've got a problem with this? No, it's fine. I promise you I'll deliver it. And again, that over-optimism comes out in both the ATC and the Garden Bridge reports, really. So again, it's not being afraid to go, no, I just need to have a look at this to make myself comfortable with it. And sometimes you're wrong. It is okay. But I'd rather check than make that mistake and not go at things as much as we should really.
Absolutely. Trust me, I'm a project manager. It's fine.
I used to say that. I don't say it anymore.
Awesome. Before I hand back to Val, I want to bring Martin in to ask you one or two surprises because he always has some great thoughts there. Okay, so Martin,
here we go. I'm getting scared now.
I just messaged Val in the background. You've actually stolen pretty much all of my questions. So I think carrying on what we just said there, you in these types of reviews, you're not often going to be a popular person. Let's face it.
No, I don't do my job to be popular in any shape or form.
You're not going to get the warmest reception, particularly in the delivery phase where things are going on. Just get it done. And I bet you've encountered some poor behaviors in that time. How do you get around it? What are the soft skills you need to do, and how do you encourage your teams to try and get people on side and really get the facts to the right people and really show these people without losing the relationship?
So that's where the critical friend element is very, very important. I try to run a culture of no surprises. So I spend quite a lot of time landing messages well. And because a lot of the time I have to make sure that the independent advisors work lands well, I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that the messages are understood, but because they're independent, I have to make it clear that they might not change it and things like that. So a lot of it's about relationships. I've always known quite a lot of people from kind of my career, and that's helped. But when I moved into assurance, I didn't know many people on the surface side because I've always been in London Underground. But actually, I developed really good I had some key relationships because some people had moved into the surface arena, which was so helpful. And then it's about developing those new relationships, making it clear that there would be no surprises, making it clear that I was going to tell them how it was. If we found anything, we could have a discussion about it, but I was going to have to tell them a lot of messages. And I think for the most part, people describe me as firm but fair. But I will give those messages if I have to, and everything like that. So yeah, that's kind of where it is really. All about relationships, all about the way you do it, and treating people how I'd want to be treated really. But it's not always easy. So yes, I'm not always popular, but I deliver that message in a way that I hope is positive, as positive as it can be in the circumstances. And we give people the chance to reply via management responses for the paperwork that's going forward. So yeah, it's not easy, but you got to do it.
So yeah, you've got a, yeah, there's a real soft skill in there. So you've done your report, you've provided your recommendations to the leaders of the business. Have you had times where they've just completely ignored it? Have they had times where they just completely disagree?
Yep, regularly. But
and how's it panned out, generally speaking? Is it, you know, the kind of shit hits the fan a few months down the line, or has it actually been all right and the culture was bad but it works? How does it generally?
Yeah, there are some projects where it takes a couple of years for the messages to come through. So when I first took over the team, there was a project that was very high profile, very political. And the team had made it very clear that there were a number of issues with it around options appraisal. Every time we reviewed it, we saw problems. But it took a couple of years for that project not to get funded. But all I was clear was that at every stage, people would be told the issues, and at some point, they could make their decisions, but they would do it on the basis of facts. So they couldn't say they were never told. So my job is to assure other people's is to decide, but as long as they're deciding from a point of knowing all the issues around that decision, because there are some decisions people are going to make from because they see a wider picture than I do. There's other, there's other pressures, there's other things that have gone on. But ultimately, as long as they've got all that information to make that decision, I say to my team, if they ignore us, well, we've done our job because we've told them. And it can be disheartening sometimes on a number of things, but actually, for the most part, I would say we get it right. And when we point out an issue, people understand why we're pointing out this issue, and it's understood, even if it's not acknowledged or affects the outcome at the end of it. But they've done it from a point of they know warts and all what our concerns are. And after this kind of crossrail situation where obviously the date slipped and everything else, a lot more people became interested in what second line assurance thought. And so it was announced today at the audit committee that the second line of assurance for Crossrail is coming to work for my team, so we can widen it out to the Elizabeth line, because we need to make sure the assurance is all in one place and that's done properly. So actually, and is comprehensive. So around the time I took over, there was a lot more interest in second line and how we were delivering messages. And so we have had more people do listen. Even if, like I said, they ultimately decide another way, we've been lucky enough for the most part that people do listen. They care more in some ways about what IPAC think, but where we are and what we're pointing to, because we're guiding IPAC, I think has become more important.
Oh, that's good. You can see it's the theme there is about transparency, and you're explaining the decisions, you're explaining how you've got to it based on evidence, and it's people may agree, may disagree, but at least it's transparent and it's there for all to read. I'll hand over to Val. He looks like he's got some questions there.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, I was just taking some notes. Lorraine and Martin had some good questions, as we always knew he would. He came through this time. It was fantastic. I actually had as well some reminiscence of when you mentioned just rolling back a bit about risk approach, and I actually think that was one of the reasons I left London, was because I was risk based, and as you mentioned, it wasn't taken seriously. The gut feel was it was being manipulated, and I didn't want that to happen. So as the first line of assurance, I think, as Dale would know and attest to, that was the reason I left. and of various factors. But I believe as well in The Courage to be Disliked, which is actually a book. So if anyone hasn't listened or read that book, it's a fantastic book. Have you read that, Lorraine?
No.
Oh, you would love it. It's right up our alley. And you're making assurance exciting. I feel like I want to do it myself. It's one of those jobs where truth is important. And you mentioned instinct as well, which is kind of like being this private detective and have that intuition. You know, they always have a gut feel, don't they, when there's a killer on the loose. And it's that hunt, I think, that maybe makes the job exciting, finding out the facts, getting to the truth, unveiling it, and then providing recommendations. But I want to get to political form you mentioned before. And how do you deal with the political pressures? Because understandably, sometimes, and this is not me, but the perception could be that assurance is a blocker and it's a inhibitor to our progress.
Yep.
How do you deal with the political pressures of getting on with the job versus doing the job right?
We always try and do the job right. There are times when we will say that we have to, it's always time. Time is the thing that people hate. Assurance reviews used to take 8 weeks. You had to plan them in, they had to be rigid. There was all sorts of things like that. We've tried to be a bit more agile. So we've shortened the terms of reference. We've got snappier processes. As I said, we do quite a lot through continuous assurance so that people are aware of what's coming up. But ultimately, people would rather avoid assurance if they can. Although in some areas we have had more of a pull now because they realise that with TfL being in such financially constrained times, actually showing that we're proving value for money, that we're doing all stuff is actually, and we've got more governance in place around controls and expenditure because we've got to. Ultimately, people know they've got to go for an assurance review because without it, they probably might not get their money or they need to prove something to their senior management and that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's we are seen as a blocker. People go, do we really have to do it? And there's some parts of any business where people are more reluctant. But for the most part, we go through this process because it's part of the governance and they know they've got to have a review if they're going to the program investment committee, then one of our papers has to go alongside it. And luckily for me, you know, the advice the chair of the program investment committee gave to the new DFT rep was always read the assurance report first because that will give you an indication on what to read in the paper. So while some people see it as a blocker, other people see it as really useful. So we overcome it. We work with people. If they really do need a review done quickly, we'll try and speed it up. But ultimately, the time is the time, and they move the dates more than we do because their planning isn't as good as ours.
Absolutely. I think there's also something around recommendations that aren't listened to becoming prophecies or self-fulfilling prophecies. And so even if they don't listen to recommendations from assurance, somehow they still come true. And so there is a value set there of having, I guess, the peripherals turned on. Is project managers and delivery guys, similar to PMO, don't have the full expanse or the big picture or the integrated view of the project. And so these are different lines and different perspectives on the same project. And I see it as a really valuable asset. Something else you mentioned before, which I wanted to come back on, 9 lines of inquiry.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the listeners?
So basically, it's things like commercial is one line of inquiry, schedule, project management, there's consents, there's engineering solutions, there's option appraisal, there's affordability, and then we have particular ones for contract award, pre-tender, and each of those lines of inquiry have a number of questions that we would normally ask and sub-questions. And by targeting the reviews more, we've just found that we're using not all the 9 lines. So consents and engineering aren't getting used as much as certainly finance, commercial and affordability and business criticality and affordability. So it was just a framework that worked very well for us to enable us to structure the assurance around questions that we could get the same answers at different times, or we could tailor the questions to suit the type of work we were doing.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's something I'm going to take away from today. And one more that I thought was interesting as well is around biases and groupthink. So, how do you influence a group of leaders? Like, if we take example Crossrail, which episode 64 is where we last spoke to some people on Crossrail project, just for an inside experience. I think it was over Beersdale, so it wasn't that effective, but it was fun. Crossrail, where arguably some of the pinch points are around everybody agreeing and harmony is important, I think, to get leadership on the right direction, but it also can be dangerous in terms of everybody agreeing with each other. And I guess the disagreeableness comes from an assurance line and a PMO line. How do you deal with groupthink mentality or that culture?
Again, just by evidence. Evidence is the key to everything you do in assurance. So if there's evidence there, you can show people why it's bad, or if the evidence isn't there, then that's why you make that point. I think sometimes people want to believe that it'll be okay, and so they give people the benefit of the doubt and stuff like that. And on Crossrail, I think they just believe their own hype around the fact that this was such a big civils project and it was all great. They got caught up in that rather than actually understanding what happened once the tunnel boring machines had gone. And so it's been the systems work, the station works and things like that, things that London Underground knows much, much better, that have been a problem. So that group mentality of course it's going to be okay, of course it's going to be okay, we're going to get there, is something that assurance has to say quite often, we're not sure you will. Your P50 program is nowhere near showing that you're going to get that. We've all seen the P0 programs that we don't hit, and then suddenly your P50 and your P80's gone out the window and it's a complete mess. So it's those kind of things that you use the evidence to show. That the milestone missing is such a key one for me. If you're missing your tier 2s and 3s, you're never going to hit your tier 1s really. Or you show me a recovery plan to show me how you're going to do it. That kind of thing I think is very powerful. So evidence is how you at least show them why you're saying what you're saying, and going back to the recommendations and stuff like that really.
Yeah,
that's not fantastic. Easy because those people are on a path and you're not getting them off it.
No, exactly. And we should shout out, to all the men and ladies on Crossrail. It is still a significant project, and by no way do we mean to be offensive, but we do like these lines of inquiry, and it's good to discuss and debate, especially big, crucial projects such as Crossrail. For those that don't know what Crossrail is, check it out on Google. It's a huge project in London. I did want to talk about evidence gathering.
It will be delivered next year. I'm confident it will be delivered next year.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. Especially during pandemic. I mean, it's been very difficult as well, considering where the world is at today. So that's a great thing to hear. Evidence gathering is an interesting one, because obviously in project controls, which is our bread and butter, and PMO, we do a lot of the fact finding too. And you do find that some of the bases of assumptions, the construction of the data that goes into these scheduling tools and risk tools. You mentioned the P50s and the P80s or P90s. That's your probability distributions. Some of the data behind them is questionable in itself.
Garbage
and it
in,
may be
garbage
because
out.
of that's right. It may be because of practice or process. It may be because of malice. It may be because of ego. We're not always sure. How do you get through? Does it take a while? Do you have some techniques in your evidence gathering style or process that you've learned over the years that you could share with our engaged listeners?
Sometimes it's simple as finding out why someone's avoiding you doing a QSRA. So if they're avoiding it, you know why they're avoiding it, because they don't want you to see where all the constraints are and stuff like that. And I used to hate it when I was a project manager getting asked to do a QSRA, because I knew I wouldn't be able to hide some of the stuff. So when I moved to assurance, it was a really good technique to go, just show me what your QSRA tells me and then I'll believe you. A lot of the stuff around risk is generally just that, how mature is the risk profile? Do they understand it? I often get told, oh, we've done a QRA, it's all fine. I know what my mitigations are, but the numbers still way below, given the kind of challenges you feel the project has. So the comment is normally the risk seems very low for the stage of the life cycle they're at. This should be reviewed to make sure that it's consistent and is robust, because half the time it's not. It's things like that with the project manager background, or even if you're in a controls background, you just see that kind of stuff. So yeah, those two tips on schedule and risk are very evident. And I've got a very good commercial manager. We've got two subject matter experts in our team, one for commercial and one for business cases. And they're both very good as experts in finding out where the issues are around the costs, around benchmarking, around where the cost plan or any issues with the procurement are, and then whether there is a value for money case and the projects are affordable. So by having that expertise on tap and being able to look at things and go, no, it's not right, is kind of where it guides you, really.
That's fantastic. I think we're on the same line of inquiry, if you like. I feel like if you follow the money and you follow the risks, you end up in some interesting conversations, and most of them are avoidable. You're right. They don't necessarily want to talk about how they got there. The numbers are the numbers, Lorraine, and that's it. I just wanted to talk about QSRA. So quantitative schedule risk analysis, or QSRA, or QC, if you're looking at cost, are both very viable and useful tools. Again, like anything else, it can be manipulated. So you need more than just that to probably get to the detail or the root cause. I find as well with risk, just a personal question from my own experience, one of the gut feels is sometimes you see, particularly contingency, I find that's an interesting tell if there's something going on, the way they structure contingency against the exposure. One of the experiences I had, Lorraine, was around factored exposure of risks in the risk register equaling the contingency perfectly. Now, would that be a tell for you?
We in TfL aren't allowed contingency. They took it away because people were, a number of years ago, actually, they took it away because people were effectively using it as their slush fund. And I think that's a good thing. I prefer that certain strategic risks are held at a more strategic level, so what we call sub-program level, rather than within the project, because there's certain risks around possessions and things like that. If you're working with Network Rail, that the project can't really always deal with. So some of those more strategic risks, I think, do need to be not held within the program. And that means that people can't get access to the money easier. There's more controls around it. But yes, it's things like I said, things balancing out to equal the budget, because they don't want to say they're over budget. It's the EFC, the cost remaining static over time. EFC should be dynamic and go up and down. If you're not seeing those movements, then again, you know that there's something going on. If people aren't hitting their spend profiles, so their forecasts, as you say, following the money sometimes tells you where things are an issue. So it's those kind of things that do help you understand where you start seeing signs of issues and stuff like that, really.
Yeah, no, that is fantastic. And I do encourage those that are working or leading projects who are listening to us right now to maybe check out your level of assurance and project controls, because maybe it could be valuable to making sure you don't have some challenges that Crossrail's experienced over a few years. And I definitely really appreciate your time, Lorraine. Obviously, you've got a lot of experience working in these projects, and I think the listeners are grateful for getting an angle from an assurance perspective, which we don't often get. So Dale, over to you, mate.
Thanks, Val. Just before you bamboozle all of our listeners completely, episode 64, which you mentioned on Crossrail, was with Richard Palczynski, and he was the project controls director at the time on Crossrail. And that was quite interesting. The one you're referring to, where we had, or you had beers, amongst other things, with our guests in Australia, you all in the same room, was with Julia and Rob. Yeah. Chulu and Rob. That was episode 6, which for comedy value alone is a fantastic episode to go back
So good.
and just listen to what a great time Val was having with Rob and Chulu while it was morning for me, it was evening for them, and they were well into their 6th or 7th drink by the time we hit record. There
Shout
we
out to Rob Moller and Chulu Camalondo. Great sports, and I wish you the best.
But yeah, so our early episodes are such good comedy value. There we go. So anyway, so I think that's cleared that one up. Episode 64 is the more serious and insightful one for projects, but we do like to entertain our listeners as well. And episode
That's
6,
good.
please go back and listen
Excellent.
to that. Back on track, Lorraine. I wanted to ask you a couple more before we head towards the end of the pod. And I wonder how, so you obviously, second line of assurance, you're looking at project management for Transport for London, and particularly the project managers that work for Transport for London and on behalf of. What about contractors? Do you go in and assess, audit, assure that contractors are doing what they should be doing?
I don't treat the staff any differently, whether they're permanent or non-permanent.
Sorry, I mean contractor as the supplier.
The suppliers.
Yeah.
We look at the commercial aspects with them and how the contracts are being managed from a project assurance perspective. I have, as part of my director role, I have an integrated assurance team who look at quality. So they tend to do supplier checks and stuff like that. And then I have internal audit who do go in, as you said, sort of that third line and go and check out if we've got problems with controls with our subcontractors and things like that. But supplier stuff, we don't tend to get involved with unless there's any particular fraud. I've got a fraud team as well. The fraud team go off and do, where we've had issues raised with us, they do look at what some of our contractors are doing, if there's a fraudulent element to it. And if people are, we've had quite a good success with Oyster fraud and things like that. We've had a number of people prosecuted for some, for the 16, the under 11 to 16 scheme. We had people who were fraudulently getting those tickets and using them. So we've convicted quite a few people and stuff like that. So that kind of stuff was about how the things were working with the suppliers. So we've done some stuff like that, but we don't tend, from an assurance perspective, I wouldn't go and look at something like Talis or one of the JVs. We would just talk about how the relationship with TfL was working from that perspective, really.
That's pretty interesting, because I'm sure one or two listeners were thinking, how far do you go on projects? And I guess just for those listeners, because we do have a global audience, Oyster, if you've ever been to London, and you should come when you're allowed to come, it's a brilliant city. You will have to get or maybe it's become easier these days with, sort of contactless payment, but the Oyster card is what traditionally gets you around. If you're using any Transport for London facilities like the big red buses and the famous underground of London, etc. And Lorraine is fortunate enough to work across all of these iconic transport systems. So once again, get yourself an Oyster card when you do come along, but don't be fraudulent when you use it. Nope. Now, I do want to shift gears slightly, Lorraine, because you did mention as one of your subtopics, imposter syndrome.
Yep.
And I feel like this is quite a personal story that you want to mention. And yeah, I bet a lot of people out there listening to this will probably go, ooh, I feel I get imposter syndrome quite a lot. But what angle did you want to come in and share with the listeners?
I think imposter syndrome, especially, I'll be honest, for a lot of women is a problem. I mentor quite a few women who've taken a non-traditional path like me. And a lot of the conversations we have are around confidence, around ability, around feeling like an imposter. I went through something a few years ago where I as in imposter syndrome, you always think you're going to get found out. So when you do get found out, you're like, well, what did you expect? This was always the path you were going down, and things like that. So I think overcoming that thing, that level of being an imposter and thinking I should be here, is kind of linked to how does a girl from East Ham get to be a director at TfL? It's that in the answer, the fact that question is even there links to the imposter syndrome. You have to believe that you should be there to enable yourself to be able to perform at that. And for me, one of the great things is that people have said to me, well, for us, it's really great to see you in that role, because it gives us hope as a role model that our path can go further than we thought as well. I never imagined I'd be a director at TfL, even if it's on an interim basis or anything else. But I was given a great opportunity, and I'm trying to make the most of that and do what's best for the team and for TfL. But there's still that doubt as to, am I as good enough as all these other people? I work with a lot of amazing people who are excellent at their jobs and just seem so much better than I probably think I am. But I'm there, I've got to give it my best, but I have to deal with that kind of imposter syndrome of going, no, you do belong. Your background doesn't kind of limit you. And you've just got to take that opportunity and make the most of it. But it can be a constant battle with, do you deserve to, how did you get here, and why do you think you're good enough?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for sharing. And I feel like that if used correctly, you can use it in two different ways. One is a negative that gets you down. But if you use it as something that drives you, it really can give you a competitive edge where you feel, oh shit, I don't feel like I belong. Let me prove this not only to others, but myself.
I think I'm very, very lucky. And my boyfriend is amazing for telling me how amazing I am and supporting me and pushing me. And that makes it a lot easier. He's in the industry as well, so we can talk about stuff. It's very helpful to me to have that support to bounce off of. And I've got some very good people around me as well who support me and you know, are not afraid to tell me stuff that I probably don't want to hear. I don't surround myself with yes people, or I want to be challenged because I know I'm not right all the time. But it is quite difficult to stop that negativity at some time when you just go, I'm in this room with all these people and oh my God. But with time and confidence and belief in yourself, you can overcome it, I think.
Absolutely agree 100%. And you have exhibited so many leadership qualities just on this call. And the final one, they're just being vulnerability and sharing that with us, because that's not easy for a lot of people to share. So I thank you for that as well. Like I said, we are heading towards the end of the podcast, and that can only mean one thing.
Oh dear.
Mr. Martin Curriston is back with one or two surprises.
Okay.
I just have a final question around project assurance. So in episode 47, just track back, whilst Dale was talking there, we spoke to Paul Googe, and he mentioned about project failure and the fact that the top 10 reasons for project failure haven't really changed in the last 30 years, if we're honest. From your reviews, do you see the same things cropping up time and time again? And does it frustrate you, the fact that you're probably having to say the same things to the same people over the same period of time?
So what we've started doing, it's something that's happening across actually all 5 teams in risk and assurance now, is identification of themes and issues. And we are lucky enough that those are fed up to board meetings and to exco executive level meetings, where they want to know what trends and issues we're finding, and then they want to know what the solutions are. When I took over project assurance, they'd made 800 recommendations the year before, but we had no idea what they told us. So we had a very rudimentary Excel sheet, and one of my staff, bless him, went through them and did me some spider maps, one for LU and one for surface. And I could see the difference in the issues. And that meant we could start to target our assurance slightly differently, and then talk about why we were seeing these trends and issues. And we've improved that over time. And we're now reporting those on a monthly basis to an exco level meeting. And we're seeing that they're trying to do something about it. Some of them are big issues, Some of them are resource retention issues. Others are the fact that we're still having issues, you know, as we reported to audit committee this morning about value for money. So it's all those kind of things, but they're issues that people are trying to solve now. And between the work that we've highlighted and some of the cross-cutting work that our independent advisors have done, TfL are trying to do the right thing about it. Sometimes it's too difficult, sometimes it's other issues, but generally they want to do the right thing and they try and do it. So I think we've done really good work in showing evidence base of what the issues are. We just have to try, and it's taken time, but if you know, again, if you just keep repeating the message and evidence base it, then you hope that people will pick it up and do something about it. But it's not easy when you've got so much data, and how do you interpret that data and things like that. It can be quite subjective, so you just have to be careful sometimes around that.
I'd imagine one of the tougher things to evidence is culture and leadership, and that's one of the main reasons for that. How do you go about evidence in a bad culture? You know, you were saying, you know, keeping the EFC the same, only having your milestone, but they're fairly tangible. How do you identify symptoms of a poor culture, and how do you tell people for that who have enabled that culture sometimes?
Well, some answers to that could be a bit career limiting. Maybe that's a conversation over a few drinks. But
generally, you know, not in obviously your TfL experience, but generally,
generally, I would say that, again, if you're aware of an issue, you have to raise it if it's causing major problems. And doing it in a way that you're showing that you've got the reason you're doing it is a good reason. It's not because you want to make mischief out of it or anything else. It's just that you want to understand that it's causing problems and affecting project delivery and stuff like that, because toxic cultures aren't good for anybody. And as a leader, I'm afraid, you know, you have to call out toxic cultures when you see them and try and deal with them. But yeah, it's not an easy thing. Not had to do it very often. But yeah, you just, again, it's all about communication and trying to do the right thing, or giving the message to someone else to do something about it who's more able.
Definitely, yeah. There's a real skill set and challenge in there. So yeah, I really don't envy your role in having to do that at times. And yeah, like you say, there is a risk. It could be career limiting if you pick the wrong person or the wrong message. So yeah, it's a real skill set there. That's all the questions we have from Val, Dale, and myself. But that's not it. We have time for our guest feature. It's called Defend the Indefensible. It's where we invite our guests to defend a ridiculous statement for 30 seconds. It's inspired by some of the wonderful things we've all heard over the course of our careers, and I imagine you've heard one or two.
This feels like, isn't this something that there used to be a podcast I used to watch on, listen to, with Colin Murray, where they had Defend the Indefensible. Yeah.
Liberated it from there.
Excellent.
Is that the one? You're the first person who's caught me on that one, actually. So,
okay, I used to love it.
It's brilliant, isn't it? So not quite a sporting one here, but if you're willing,
I'll give it a go.
We can make a start. Okay. So Lorraine, your statement to defend for 30 seconds. I'm a project manager with a major closure next week. Why am I wasting my time with assurance when I can be out on site delivering? Discuss.
So I have to defend it from an assurance perspective.
Defend it from
any perspective. Okay. Well, the reason that you have to do assurance in the fact that your closure might be next week, but you've not got all the approvals in place you need, you could go out on site and find that actually you've not got a program for delivery, and you could screw up the railway in a complete way by overrunning on Monday morning. So by going into my process, having at least have a look at it and deal with it, means that you could save yourself a great amount of reputational risk and getting the sack on Monday morning when you fuck over the railway and the trains aren't running on Monday morning. So I'd suggest that you just get into gear, get with the program, go through the review quickly, and then you might find that by Monday morning you still got a job and you're able to deliver the next project in a better way.
Spoken like a true PM there, Jeff.
Boom.
Brilliant. Before we go, got time for one more feature. It's called Fiverr. 5 quick fire questions all about yourself. So
Okay.
again, if you're ready,
Yep,
let's
ready.
make a start. Okay.
Okay.
Question 1. Would you rather spend your day with people or technology?
People.
What's more important, time, cost, or quality?
Cost for TFL at the moment.
Interesting. What book would you recommend to our subscribers?
The Chimp Paradox by Dr. Steve Peters.
Yeah, that's a good book. What will be your new work routine? Office, home, or hybrid?
Hybrid.
Nice. Last one. What was your biggest mistake on a project?
My biggest mistake on the project was not escalating far enough up the organisation to deal with a matter that cost us a lot of money in the end. I thought I could solve it myself, and I came close to solving it, but it became a problem. And I should have just bitten the bullet and escalated it up the organisation to get it dealt with in a better way.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. That was really good. Back to you, Dale.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Lorraine. Awesome. We love the last bits. We just get to know you a little bit more, but you've shared so much about yourself through the entire podcast. It's all been about getting to know you. And we thank you for that, because for, I think, many of those out there, including ourselves, you've lifted the lid on what assurance does. And it's amazing. We get a chance to lift the bonnet and go, how does this engine work? And you've given us such a great insight into assurance, and what it means. You know, it's not just a boxing exercise that organizations do, but it's really, really important. And I think people will appreciate that too. I also want to just comment on your passion for it, because I think if those heard what assurance was about from a textbook, perhaps, or just reading about it, they'd probably go, oh, okay. Sounds like, I have to be the school teacher, or, someone looking at the rule book. But as Val says, you've got this passion for it. You bring it to life. You make it interesting. It's like working as a detective, trying to look through and picking up different patterns and what you can find. So we thank you for that as well. But before we let you go, I just want to know if you have any final thoughts for our listeners.
Don't fight assurance. The little skit we just did about why assurance works. I went to an extreme on it, but actually don't fight it, use it. One of the key things that we always ask at the end of our reviews is there anything we can help you with? So is there a message that you need escalating that we can help with? And I think use it to your advantage. We're there to help, but we do have to point out issues. So yeah, go with it, welcome it, participate, get a good outcome. If you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to worry about. So yeah, assurance can help as well as take up some of your time, but it's an exercise that I believe adds value in an organization, and I know other organizations see it as that as well. So, and I am passionate about it because I found my home and I really like it.
Awesome. Fantastic. Val, final thoughts?
Oh, thanks, Dale. Lorraine, it's always a pleasure to hear from people who care about what they do, and we love having them on the show. We'd love to have you back to do a part 2 of assurance. Maybe we can dig a little deeper.
Sure.
But it's been an absolute pleasure, and you've definitely enlightened me in the assurance space, and hopefully a lot of our listeners as well. So thanks for your time.
You're welcome.
So folks, that is it. That is all the time we have on this episode. But remember to hit subscribe before you go. A massive thank you once again to Lorraine Humphrey for sharing her insight. And thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.